design panel where we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the Urgot. Where are my Urgot players? So, as you guys know, a lot goes into champion creation for League of Legends. It's a huge multidisciplinary effort. We try really hard to have awesome art, great sound, a good backstory, a really cohesive theme. All of those pieces go together to really deliver on the champions that we're the most proud of and you guys seem to really like to play. We are game designers, so we are going to talk to you today a little bit about what we think goes into making a champion that's good to play, that is fun to play, is maybe not too frustrating to play against, and really does cool things out on the rift. And the format for this, game design is a super subjective science, using that term loosely. And we argue a lot, we debate a lot, it's ugly, there may be knives involved, and we thought you guys would like to see a little bit of that process. So, I have in my hand some hopefully provocative questions that I'm going to spring on these guys. Woo! Provocative! Yeah, provocative. So before we go into that, let's introduce the panel.
Hi, I'm Mark Yetter. My summoner name is Riot and I work on the Champion Update team.
My name's Roy Philip. Feral Pony. I work on the game systems team, so do stuff like that. I don't know what that was. Didn't even hear you.
Thanks, Feral Pony.
I'm August Browning. I go by Gypsy Lord. I work on the Champion team. Some of my past projects include Vi, Jinx, and most recently Nar.
I'm Chris Tom. I'm Riot With. I do design communications management, write the patch notes. My past projects include Vi, Jinx, and Nar. Yeah.
And my name's Ed Street. I go by Ghost Crawler, and I'm one of the lead designers. So, one of the things the design team's been working on a lot lately is really trying to understand what makes a well-designed champion. What are the right mix of ingredients that delivers on something that is really fun for you guys to play. And we've kind of narrowed it down to 4 categories, and we're going to talk about those today. The first category is something we call unique inputs, which is a super design jargony term I'm going to ask Chris Tom to elucidate.
Yeah, so unique inputs are kind of what make a champion really unique to play. So when you pick up a champion, how do you think about the game and how do you think about engaging with the game? I think stealing August's best example, Draven. When you pick Draven, you're catching axes. You're like, I'm going to be the guy who throws axes, catches axes. I have this in combat, super micro, all that kind of stuff. I think it's really important just because it really shows who you are. When you pick Draven, you're telling everyone, this is who I am. I'm an obnoxious, axe throwing, mustache wielding
It's actually, inputs are a big factor in contributing to why different champions can really feel like, you have a connection to them, they're your main, they match your play style, and that's what, that's why I really love Sins. I played him for 500 games, and I just love getting people to chase me versus Draven and catching axes and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's what you're proud of in the game, in terms of how you play it.
So a lot of when we're talking about unique inputs a lot, we talk internally about skill shots, but I know skill shots aren't the only type of unique input we have.
Right, so why skill shots can be unique input and important is that they offer your character a path to mastery. Every AD carry player is probably going to know the basics of auto-attacking, right? But if you're an Ezreal main, you also know about how Mystic Shot is a skill shot, and you have to shoot it at people to get lifesteal off of the machine procs. And so that kind of extends your path to mastery on Ezreal. But there are multiple ways to master a champion beyond just mechanical skill, like shooting a skill shot. Annie's passive, for example, is a very good example of Annie players are always playing around their passive, counting to 5, and then stunning guys and killing them instantly. 4? That's the problem. It's embarrassing.
So just a question for you guys. Lux's light binding and Urgot's dark binding, really similar abilities. Would we call those unique inputs, like distinct enough from each other?
I mean, I think that I would say yes, though it's a spectrum, right? You know, that's a fairly soft. That's right. Light binding hits 2 and Urgot hits 1, and so you do think about how you use these skills differently. You know, if I'm playing mid lane and my opponent is hiding behind 1 minion, I could still go for a light binding where I couldn't go for a dark binding, I guess. And so I would say yes, but that's a pretty soft example. If those were the only differentiating skills on those 2 characters, they would feel probably too similar.
So, I guess what I would say is, going off of that is, I would say no, actually. I don't think light binding and dark binding in a vacuum are unique inputs, because at the end of the day, what are they? Snare that guy! That's what you're trying to do. I mean, maybe you can snare 2 guys, but you're still like, snare that guy, that's what you're trying to do. What makes characters have unique inputs, though, is what they do after those bindings hit that is important. So Lux is then trying to like hit you with her ultimate, hit you with her E, like get the E under you and a detonate. Whereas Morgana uses her dark binding to initiate on you with her ultimate and try to get close to you and use I forget what it's called, dark chain?
Dark Soul Shackle?
Soul Shackle.
God, it's interesting though, because like the question I would have is something like Nami Q, like her bubble and like Cho'Gath Rupture, like those are virtually the same abilities. But then when you actually think about them, like very few people actually say that's the same input, because like you're thinking about them really differently. Like, would you say those are different inputs? Like,
Is it just the art and theming that make them different?
bubbles, spikes?
Well, I think it's all about sort of the setup and what other things you're doing around it as well that contribute. Like inputs, if you look at each individual skill, I think it's oftentimes very subjective, as we talked about earlier. Where like dark binding, light binding, they're really similar, but there's shades and differences. Whereas something like Bubble, Aqua Prison, and Cho'Gath Rupture are very, very similar functionally, but it's all about how you set those up beforehand. So like Nami, for example, has a slow in her E. So she can basically hit somebody with a slow, then try and do the bubble. And so that process, that 2 steps, is a different input than Cho'Gath, where he tries to open with Rupture.
Cool. So inputs are really about how a player is interacting with their champion. The second category of characteristics we really like to see in healthy champions are unique outputs. Mark, what is a unique output?
So, where inputs are like, you know, I'm Draven, I'm catching my axes, I'm playing my game, or I'm Varus, I'm pulling my bow and drawing it and shooting arrows at people, right? Those feel really different, but in the end, they're both basically just doing damage. And outputs are that sort of secondary element, the damage. What is actually happening to the game when my character casts these skills? And so, unique outputs are when characters can do something with one of their skills that no one else in the game can do, right? I'm Azir and I'm building a tower out of a destroyed, tower rubble, or I'm Yasuo and I'm blocking, projectiles with my wind wall, or these type of things. I'm Sivir and I'm saying, oh, my whole team can now rush in, and that Olaf that's now on my team, and he struggles to get to their Caitlyn, but now with my ultimate, he can get there much quicker.
Well, you mentioned projectile blocks. That was the question I had, is Yasuo has wind wall, which blocks projectiles, and then Braum blocks projectiles. Are those unique outputs?
So, at first glance, you might say, no, they both block projectiles. Those aren't unique. But I think they are unique because they are on different characters that occupy different classes. And so Braum is very much a support, whereas Yasuo is very much a mid laner or a top laner. And so because they occupy different classes, you can end up making a team around them, and they don't really force each other out or conflict with each other in that way.
So I agree with for a completely different reason, which is I feel that wind wall and Braum, while they both block projectiles, the way that you as an opponent interact with them is very different. Wind wall is you throw it out, it's a static piece of effectively terrain that blocks projectiles, whereas Braum is actually, he's moving around. You're trying to work around his movement as well as your own movement. And so the way those position plays work out is very, very different to me, more so than the class differentiation.
But I mean, typically, like, Braum is kind of like on the back line, so usually I feel like that interaction roughly goes about the same, just because, like, wind wall and projectile blocking on Braum, because he moves so slow when he's blocking projectiles, it's like, it feels very similar in some way.
Well, Braum's not that similar.
Technically, Braum gets that 10% movement speed when he uses E.
Alright, so. Okay, alright, you know what? It's like 2 to 1 now, so let's do this.
I got one right.
I was really curious, like, you know, we talked about, like, you know, projectile blocking, right? And we had that in two champions one after another, right? And it's like, are we running out? Like, will we run out, or?
I think it's a slippery slope, and it's also dangerous territory when we say, okay, Yasuo has wind wall, and it's like blocking projectiles. This is totally new. This is really awesome. It's making me think about the game in a different way as an opponent or an ally. But we have to be careful then to not cannibalize that. Put in, you know, if we made the next 10 champions all have projectile blocking, then is that unique anymore? Not at all, right? If we make a whole bunch of new champions that can now also create towers, is yours passive even a unique thing anymore? No. So we want to. I mean, I would say we should be more careful in the future about preserving things that characters do that are sort of their unique elements.
Like a 0. Don't add an extra one.
What about revive passes?
Revive passes.
So another question I have then is, if it's really important that every champion has unique output, we have over 100 champions and we're not slowing down anytime soon, does that mean that the first time these guys see a new champion on the Rift, they're just going to lose because they don't know necessarily how to react to it?
Quite possible. Yes. I mean, that's balanced out with the fact that that champion guy probably just bottom and has no idea what they're doing. But the important part is not that like you see a skill and it beats you and that's not fair because you haven't seen it before. It's important though that when you do get beat by a skill by like say Yasuo's wind wall, it's clear what happened. And so that you can then take that information into account and approach the situation in a different way next time, knowing, oh, it destroys projectiles, I get it. Well, I lost this game, but next game I'll ban Yasuo.
And ideally, you would have it before you sort of lose the game, but the first time you throw an auto attack, right, you'll see it pop against the wall. You figure, okay, but that actually happened to me, let's have more time, okay. Now, it's sort of this experimentation loop, and you should be able to figure stuff out fairly quickly, and that's sort of a lot of the fun of League of Legends and when your champions come out.
So I'm serious about the question is, does Teemo have unique output?
No.
Yes. Absolutely. Is it healthy for the game?
So this brings up sort of the other side of it. These things we're talking about today are sort of new concepts of defining unique characters that can live, you know, in this world of 120 champions, but all be brought for different reasons and all feel valuable. But then Teemo brings up the kind of the old school classic design problems of just like, is this character really frustrating to play against and stuff? And he does a lot of unique things. But right. But can we make it better? Yes, probably. We can make it more, you know, have better, you know, highs and lows, better counterplay, more engaging.
Give him more mushrooms!
Abilities.
I mean, you jokingly asked if frustration was a unique output, and I would say, honestly, yes, in some cases. I mean, so the counter of what he uses is actually Shaco. Like, Shaco is a character that you play because you want to infuriate your opponents. And in some ways, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line between just making everyone else kind of rage quit the game and you having sort of this fun trickster style play.
Okay, so we talked about unique inputs, unique outputs. I'm going to ask questions about the other two characteristics of champions, and then we want to make sure to give you guys a chance to ask questions. We love being able to come to these conventions and talk to players, so be thinking about the kind of stuff you'd like to ask, and I'll give you a chance to line up here in a few minutes. The third category is something we call unique strategic identity. I'm going to call on Mr. Feeney to try to explain what does that mean. It's very jargony.
That is like the hardest thing to say fast. Unique strategic identity. So if you view like inputs as how you interact with your character, and then you view outputs as how the other characters in the game interact with your character, strategic identity is how your team or the opposing team interacts with your character. So it's stuff like, if I take Jace for example, his input might be he throws down an acceleration gate and he shock blasts through it. His output might be, you have to worry about dodging stuff at high moving projectiles at 18 under 2000 range. His team identity, his unique strategic identity, totally say this, is that he offers a lot in terms of increasing, like adding to a poke composition. He has a lot of long range threat. His acceleration gate allows his team to move in and out of combat. It's all about like how a character uniquely influences the way their team plays.
Cool. So we have a lot of champions whose strategic identity we're pretty happy with. I just like to ask all you guys, like, who's your favorite in terms of strategic identity?
I like a champion that I think I don't actually play a lot of, and I'm not great at it, but I really love what he does when he's in the game. Is Twisted Fate.
Yeah, that was the easy one.
Is, you know, because when he's in the game, right, you have this sort of semi-global threat all the time. You can't really run, you can't really hide, and his ultimate sort of brings a lot. And compared to a lot of other mid laners who are more about pushing or, you know, beating their opponent or being an assassin, TF has this really sort of far-reaching, you know, thing that he does for him.
This is probably a little more contentious. I think Trundle has a really unique identity. Yeah, a lot of Trundle players now. This is awesome. Like, if you need a guy to break down a brick wall, Trundle's your guy. He's gonna walk up, just break down the tank in front of you, and then basically just exert so much pressure. He also has like the idea just of Ice Pillar is super strategically interesting, both from an initiation and a counter initiation standpoint. He works fantastic in poke compositions. There's a number of really unique things that he brings to the team.
Yeah,
I myself am a big fan of Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw I think he creates a unique strategic identity because he's so powerful with his damage when he is kept alive, but it's so hard to keep him alive that everybody has to, both teams have to think about, the enemy team's like, how do I get to Kog'Maw? Kill him. And then the allied team is like, how do we make it so that they never ever get to Kog'Maw, which brought up like 4 support comps in Kog'Maw, which is just like really hard to deal with. And that's just a really exciting way, I think, that he expressed the identity of the game. It's just the game becomes about killing Kog'Maw or protecting Kog'Maw for both teams, and they all play around that in a way that's like even more extreme than the other 80 carries who are all very powerful as well.
Nunu. Yeah. I like, he kind of does a lot of things that are really annoying, but I just think like in terms of identity, he's kind of like the objective buster, right? Like, or the counter jungler, which is really hard to kind of imagine when you have like Lee Sin or Jarvan in the game. But still, like Nunu has this idea of just when you pick him, you're gonna be, yes, there's this whole entire idea of like I'm buffing my AD carry, which kind of puts him in a different space. But I like the idea of like kind of chopping down.
So you're never gonna outsmite a Nunu.
Yeah.
If our team wants to take Dragon, we're gonna do it now. There's nothing you can do to stop us.
I was gonna make that comment. But he didn't say it. Just leave it at that.
So you guys are talking a lot about how the strategic identity kind of helps your team focus around the strategy you're going to use in that particular fight. So people in the audience might be saying, Riot doesn't like it when I play one champion. Is that how we feel?
Yes. No, we love it when you play one champion. If you want to be a Garen main and play Garen for 1,000 games, go do it. That should be viable and fun and exciting.
Urgot!
The important part about that.
Yeah, I think the important part is that the other champions in the game will rotate. And that'll happen naturally. Even if every person that played League of Legends only played a single champion, I think all of this stuff is still important and relevant because the other 9 champions in the game will be rotating. And as long as each one brings something that's unique to the game, you're going to have huge varied experiences, and each game will feel unique and interesting.
Like, in talking about strategic identities in regards to Garen based off that, it's like, one game you might be like, oh, I'm picking Garen because we have a reset comp with a Jinx and a Kha'Zix on it, and a Katarina. And so my whole job is to find that guy who's like really low health and ult him. And then, when he's dead, Jinx and Kha'Zix and Katarina just go off, and we win. And then another game you might be saying, okay, we have the run-at-them comp with Sivir and Jace and another Sivir. And then it's just like, okay, well, I'm not the defining strategy of this game, but I can play in the Sivir and Jace's strategy by being a run-at-them guy and a brick wall, and we'll go and do that. And that'll make your Garen games different. That game 1 is different than game 2, and is different than game 500.
So along those same lines, are we really expecting players in this short period of champion select in a solo queue to say like, hey, let's build a poke comp or let's build a split push comp or something?
I don't think that's actually the goal. It's more just about working with what you have, right? Every game is going to have a different combination of 5 champions on your team and 5 champions on the enemy team. And as long as that makes you think, as long as that makes the experience varied from game to game, that's the goal. It's not like, oh, if my AD carry picked Kog'Maw, now I can't pick my favorite Leona because I need to be playing Janet. That's not what it's about. At least in my opinion, it's more about, okay, well, if I'm playing Leona, how do I think about the team where I'm with a Kog'Maw or the team where I'm with a Tristan? And it might be different, and I might play differently, and that's a great thing because that's what's the next game going to be like? Oh, I don't know. It's going to be totally different.
I also think it's really cool when you have like mains who make it all the way up to Diamond, just playing like one guy like Annie-Bot, who kind of just plays like Annie in every position, different runes, different masteries, that kind of stuff, and has to like do everything very different. It's just like, it's a cool way of basically saying like, I've mastered this champion so well that I know how to get around my weaknesses and like play with this in all these different ways.
So we talked about some champions that we thought deliver on strategic diversity. What's an example of someone who may have good inputs and outputs, but really doesn't have a strong strategic identity?
Going down this way, Lisa. Although,
not to be bad champion, just maybe
great inputs, great outputs. Although, okay, so here's the thing. It's like, I mean, playing devil's advocate, Lee Sin's like strategic identity just falls off in 30 minutes.
Definitely brings up the point is like, are there certain identities that we don't want? And I would say yes. And we want the identity to be probably, carried throughout the whole game, have a reasonable response from your opponents, and also be a satisfying thing. My entire identity was I sit in the fountain and give my team 300 armor aura, and I do nothing else.
That's what I did.
Probably not very fun character play.
I mean, we kind of like, we do have time-based or like, I guess, game progression-based strategic identity. Vayne is a really good example of someone who, there you go, but like, weak early game because I'm going to become a big slave king.
So I think this brings up the fact that this is a spectrum. It's not just like we don't want characters to have different power levels with different game times. We don't want a game that's so extreme where if you play a character like Lee Sin, that's not the case currently, but if you had a game where let's say we put all of Lee Sin's power into his level 2, for whatever reason, that was it, and he just crushed the game. It was like, you win the game in 10 minutes or you're just dead. But you don't win the game 50% of the time in the first 10 minutes. That's too extreme for us. The game's probably too volatile and not in a really fun, healthy way. I think it's totally fine for a character like Lee Sin to have a weakness that he actually becomes less relevant in the game as time goes on.
He just loses Q in 30 minutes. Yeah, more and more blind. Q goes this way.
So here's a hot button term we hear a lot on Reddit forums. Is it okay for generalists to be your strategic identity?
I think that in theory, if you make a generalist character who's sort of the jack of all trades, master of none, that sounds like it can be balanced and it can be fair because this person's better in some things and worse than others. But I think that what it does to the game is it sort of flattens the experience because what does a generalist do? Oh, I'm good at everything and kind of bad at nothing. And so I approach every game the same way. I never have to really think about who my opponents are, who my teammates are, and it just sort of creates a very flat experience. And when you're playing against a generalist, it's the same thing. Do they have a weakness that I can exploit, or they just kind of do everything?
Right, compare like, say, Vayne in lane to old Lucian, right? So like, when you pick Vayne in lane against a Caitlyn, you know that you're going to have to play better or differently to survive that lane, because Caitlyn's long-range auto attack is always just going to be poking you down the whole time. And Vayne has that really real, like, early weakness in lane. Whereas old Lucian especially was kind of like just generally, he's got poke, he's got range, he's got burst, he's got disengage, he's got his ultimate on a 10-second cooldown. Like he basically had a general set of tools that let him deal with most situations. And so he didn't really care who he got picked into. And so you just see, like, I'll just pick Lucian because whatever. Whereas we prefer a situation where, like, I will pick Vayne this game, but I know I'm at a disadvantage for these reasons against Caitlyn, and here's how I'm going to play differently, or here's how I'm going to here's the support I'm going to ask my support player to play to help me out here, or something like that. And we think that creates a lot more interesting games that are more varied and fun over the long run.
And this doesn't mean that generalist champions are bad champions. This is actually something that we're sort of discovering now, I think, and we're like saying, oh, can we take these generalists and really amp up something that they do? Maybe even the coolest thing that they do, right? You say, well, you've got Lee Sin. What's the coolest thing he does? Oh, I don't know, he's dashing around, ward hopping, like kicking people into his team. Let's take that to 11, and then maybe we can, you know, focus him in an area that makes him a more differentiated pick rather than just sort of jack of all trades.
I'm going to jump off of that. It's such a great transition. We've talked about inputs, outputs, strategic identity, and the final category is real weaknesses. August, what is a real, true weakness?
Okay, so here's something real deep. A real weakness has to be meaningful and exist.
What is it?
But what I mean by that is like, a good metric for what a real weakness would be is that like, if you are a player, you think about that weakness when you select the champion. So you say like, oh, I'm Vayne, I have very short range in lane, and I'm gonna have a hard time. Here's how I approach laning phase in a different way. We kind of already talked about this a bit. And then, from the enemy perspective, it's, if you're an enemy player, you can look at that character, even when they beat you, and say, oh, well, here's something that they aren't as good at, and so I can perhaps exploit that or try to take advantage of that next game. And so both parties kind of like have a way to approach what that character is good at and what that character is bad at. And so an example of a character with meaningful weakness would be Kog'Maw, where it's like you have to make and protect the Kog'Maw team because Kog'Maw has the lowest escapability even for an AD carry. And so you really have to think about how are we going to keep this guy alive. Compared to Lucian, especially old Lucian again, old Lucian is the big one, where it's just like, yeah, I'm picking on him a bit, but you know, we're trying to get him in a good spot. I think we are making progress there. But like, old Lucian was like, I burst you, I dash, I range, I poke, yada, 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 yada. And at the end of the day, like, if you were playing against Lucian, there wasn't really something you could identify and say, well, this is how I'm going to get him. And this is the way that I can beat him.
It's most important to also mention that a real weakness is a weakness that is in addition to your character class or your type. So if you're playing, like saying that all marksmen are squishy, doesn't mean that squishy can be your real weakness. It needs to be something else on top of that. Same with like, you know, tanks having effectively shorter range, right? You can't say, hey, my tank has short range, so therefore it's its weakness. You need to have something in addition to that for it to be a meaningful real weakness.
So if I identify my champion's weakness, but I go for a particular item build to kind of negate that weakness, is that okay or is that wrong?
Kog'Maw was the best, like, way back, I think it was end of season 4, like Kog.
Way back.
Years.
Even months ago.
It was like Kog standard rush, right? Was Triforce to Borg, and to me that was just like, it was so perfect for him, and that's why like we saw like this huge spike of Kog in like pro play, high level play. It was just because this supposedly squishy, immobile thing, like, was supposed to be squishy and immobile, but then he was picking up these perfect items to give him all of that stuff, and he didn't have to like think about it. Like that was the thing that like kind of I think was really tough about.
So I disagree completely on this. Actually, I feel like the entire point of the item system is often to either augment your strengths or make up for weaknesses.
I agree with that, but I mean, but the whole idea of him having a weakness, like Kog'Maw's identity, I feel like if he was like picking up a Randuin, so I was like, okay, there's all these AD guys, there's a Zed, I'm gonna buy a Randuin, I'm not gonna get anything. So that's a cool choice that he kind of like shows the world. But if he's just like, I am literally buying the items I will always buy no matter what, and I'm getting all of this stuff, like to me that's a big challenge because then you have this, just pick Kog'Maw whenever.
I mean, there were higher DPS builds at the same time, though. You could have gone like the traditional IEPD, and your archetypes would do more than Trinity Force 4.
I guess technically, but if they're dead
Not
in 3 shots,
technically.
if they're dead in 3 shots, if they're dead in 3 shots, or they're dead in like 2.5, I don't know.
So, I mean, this is obviously somewhat subjective on this.
Yeah.
Like how much are you giving up? How much you want to augment your strengths versus your weakness? Is it okay for an item fundamentally to augment a strength and on the side also supplement a weakness? Or a separate strength for a character?
Right.
I think that will naturally happen if items as a whole have more than one effect. That will often always occur to some degree. I just think they're obviously, I do agree with you that item build, especially back in the day, was probably too far in that direction, but I don't think it was entirely black and white.
So for someone sitting out there in the audience, they may be thinking, it's not fun to have a weakness. Why should they be happy their champion has a weakness?
I was just thinking about this when we were talking about weaknesses earlier. Weaknesses are not about like, oh hey, guess what? Now you have to feel sucky because you can't do this thing, or you're really weak and you're gonna die. But but it's actually more that having a weakness that you understand and is clear allows your champion to have like really extreme strengths and do really, you know, far out there unique things. Like Kog'Maw couldn't have the range he has, the damage he has, the poke he has. You know, Udyr, you know, has this really clear weakness of having no ranged abilities, like period. He has to, you know, he has to get to you. He has to run to you with no dash and no range and get to you. But the trade-off is he gets to be like tanky as hell. He gets to do crazy damage, right? He gets to stun, you know, a whole bunch of people if he's switching targets, and it really allows, you know, allows for that.
I like the idea, like when there are good weaknesses that kind of augment the strengths in a sense. So it's
Right.
like Vayne would be the best example. When you pick Vayne, yeah, you think about her range, but in reality, like you also focus on like the fact that she has this short single target selection, burns through targets until she gets to the back line.
Right, and like speaking of Vayne, I think one of the things that's great about Vayne's weakness is that I would argue for a number of players, including myself, it's exciting to deal with that weakness because of what you get if you manage to succeed, right? Like you're chasing the Vayne game, right? You know what I'm talking about. Five pentakills in a row, like keeping them at their fountain, silver bullets everywhere. Like that's exciting, and it's made I think more exciting by the fact that you have to get past this laning phase that she has. But then when you get there, it's this huge reward that you don't see every single day.
I mean, the flip side of this, I don't think necessarily that a weakness is always the same in how other players can treat it. For example, you mentioned the Vayne thing, I think it's a really fantastic weakness in lane, but we've also seen a world where, you know, if you're playing like a fighter or someone who's going on top, Vayne's weakness isn't even a weakness, because you have to, if you're playing Udyr, and you have to run up and hit Vayne in the face, she's just going to silver bolt you and just out-damage you and just murder you. And that's, in that case, I don't think particularly exciting for the Udyr player.
You might say she can damage you to death.
One could say that, but you wouldn't.
Yeah,
Sorry, you shouldn't. Yeah.
I have one more question, and then we'll open it up to you guys. So based on these four characteristics, inputs, outputs, strategic identity, and real weaknesses, let's take it back to Urgot. Based on that, is Urgot a well-designed champion?
No boy.
Technically, under all of these, I say yes. Like, I think he's got, like, his inputs, okay, so yes, but he's got the weirdest array of things that make him just, like, the honest champion. Like,
That's why I would say no.
well, but he falls under, like, these four categories. We're just saying these four. I would say yes. Like, he has,
Some of them.
he's got, like, a strategic identity as a tanky 80 carry that initiates by, I have no idea why, but he's got crazy weird inputs. I'm just, like, tank guy.
He's got the inputs. He's got some outputs, right? With his,
You think
swap positions.
Yeah.
I just think that the combination, because the things that he does are so sort of fundamentally opposed to each other. Like, I want to stay really far range and poke you with locked-on missiles, or I want to swap places with you in the middle of the fight. It creates a very muddled strategic identity. Why do I bring, you know, why does Urgot? Is he supposed to grab someone from the middle of their team, or is he supposed to help us with the poke comp? So strategic identity for me is not there.
And I would agree wholeheartedly. He might even have the most unique inputs.
He has a lot of
Like, it's not the outputs to it, but I think he also falls flat in the unique weakness. Yeah. Because, you know, he's a range guy who's like super tanky. He even has like, even supersedes the weaknesses of his class on top of like his own personal weaknesses. He's tough to kill, he can slow you game there. If you get to him, you can just like swamp onto somebody else. He has a ton of resistances. I think he's a very, very cool champion, but I don't think he meets all the criteria.
And then I guess the thing I'll add to this is, while these four things, inputs, outputs, strategic identity, and weaknesses are important, there's also just other things generally you have to consider about a champion design, like, are they fun to play? Are they fun to play against, right? And you need to evaluate it versus these things. And so, for example, Urgot may have good outputs, and what he does to you, like, reduces your damage by 15%.
That's the weirdest pass.
It's like, that's not very good gameplay there. So even though it is an output, I don't think it's a very good one that we actually want to support.
I mean, and there are, all of that said, there are actually a lot of cool things about Urgot that
Yes.
are worth, you know, preserving if we ever update them in the future and stuff like that. And so, we could go across every single champion in the entire roster and pick it apart. And I don't know, there's good things and there's bad things, and this is like about the future of the game, right? We want to make things better, we want to continue, you know, evolving and improving all of the characters and all of the game.
So we want to give you guys a chance to ask questions. I believe we have two microphones in these two corners here, so you can
Find your way to the front.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Stay safe.
We'll almost certainly not have time to answer every question, but immediately following this panel, we are going to go to the main queue room, which is not Riot Cube for this panel, but the main one past the registration when you first came to PAX. And we'll hang out there for an hour, as long as it takes to talk to you guys. Follow us over there after this panel. All right, we'll probably we'll start on the left and we'll bounce back and forth. Go for it.
So about every 3 months, the internet gets really pissy about mobility creep. So I was wondering if you guys thought it was a thing and if it's a problem.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mobility
The question is on mobility creep. I don't know if everybody here.
How do we feel about it? I think that, you know, the state of the games from the launch to now is very different, right, in terms of the amount of mobility on characters and just overall. And so I think that we've sort of sometimes taken a step back and evaluated where we are now versus where we started. And we do think that mobility is a good thing for the game, and we like that there's more mobility in the game now than there used to be. But you know, we need to sort of be cautious about how far we go with it. You know, what classes and what types of characters should have mobility by default? You know, should every ADC in the game have a dash? No, probably not. Should mages? Also, no, probably not. And so, if we can set ourselves better standards, we can sort of, you know who's supposed to have mobility, who's not, and when you get it, and when that's sort of special versus.
I think we have embraced a few certain, at least classes that say like you will all probably have some form of dash.
It's like assassins,
Yeah.
sort of more like backline, you know, mobile fighter types. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's keep going over here.
Hello. So for every champion that actually makes it to release, about how many end up in the recycling bin? And also, how long does it take for that process to actually happen, for them to get to release?
So, this is a question about basically ideation, right? Like how we ideate on champions and who makes it, who doesn't. It depends on like the slot and what we're looking for, but there are a lot of pretty cool champion ideas that we would just decided at times like, hey, this isn't as good as it could be, this isn't the best thing we could do, and they fall by the wayside. That said, sometimes the really exciting ones keep coming back. Vi was an example of this, where her original pitch was like, she was like this crazy girl, this girl with giant gloves from Piltover wearing like almost no clothes and had roller skates. And
Sounds like an awesome skin.
so that concept itself wasn't that great, but it had a core that was really exciting, like that, you know, that rough like giant gauntlet thing, and it came back eventually, and it kept coming back until eventually it's like, wow, this is actually really cool. We've got what we want here. We made Vi. To answer timeline question, again, that depends on the champion, what's going on. I worked on Vi, for example, for about 6 months, and I worked on Jinx for over a year. It really just depends on what the character needs, what's holding it back, and also just release schedules and resources as well. Like, do we have animators available? Do we have particle artists? Do we have designers?
And you have to work at it like one at a time. You can't actually work them all at the same time. Like you can't start animating without the actual model and things like that.
Right.
Right, over here, Mr. Tino.
I like your hat.
I like your hat.
Speaking of mobility, I have a question for another ADC that kind of has confusing ultis and her role in the game, because she's my favorite champion, absolutely, and it's about Quinn, who has an ulti, you turn into the corner, you get in all close, and then you just kind of destroy him like an assassin, but not really a lot of the damages towards late game, and like how you just feel about her weaknesses versus her strengths. So that I can know, so that I can be better.
Quinn just, currently she takes this combination of being a sort of a marksman pattern within an assassin pattern, where she turns into, you know, Valor. She doesn't turn into Valor, but when Valor takes over. And we thought about that, and if that's, you know, if we can make that viable, or if we want to explore other things with her. And so I think that in the future, and there's no promises here, but things that we've talked about is, you know, do we want to support the assassin pattern? Maybe. Do we want to, and if we did, we would probably say, well, what are things that assassins typically need when they go in? They probably also need to get out without dying, and Quinn kind of has that problem right now, where she doesn't get out. And, or do we want to try other things, where, you know, Quinn and Valor are this sort of scouting duo, and they're more about roaming the map, and like, trying to track enemy positions, get behind enemy lines, and there's a lot of places we can go, where we take her current, you know, where she is, and try and level her up.
Okay, this side.
Why is Lee Sin affected by blinds?
Like blinds?
You can get out now. You can love them if you want. Yeah.
200
Timo's toxic shot has a crippling poison in it as well that really affects Lee Sin's ability to hit people with his punches. So yeah, you know how it is. Timo,
The Falcons are disorienting. You'll get the lines that you have.
technicalities.
Right,
wait, before you ask your question, that is an awesome cosplay.
That is
like.
Okay. Alright, one, thanks for making mine. But is the... Okay, is the character's personality what creates the champion? Or do y'all create the champion, decide their personality? Like the link between Vi and Jinx, like the link between Vi and Caitlyn. Why do you create the characters the way you do, instead of why do you create them how they feel?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's...
Yes.
Yes!
I think what you're asking is basically like, in terms of champion creation, like what sets things off typically, and why do we take that process?
What sets their personality more so?
How do we set their personality?
Okay.
Is it based on their fighting, or is it based on just I want this attitude on this shit?
It really, it's a combination. It really depends. We want to make champions who are a good conglomeration of theme and character and their abilities and their kits, how they feel to play. And so sometimes you might have a character like Draven, who Draven did not come from a drawing or a kit. He came from a personality pitch, which is like, what if we had this total like obnoxious mustache guy who's just totally obsessed with himself and thinks he's the greatest, right? And we thought that would be a really compelling personality to put into League, and so we actually designed our team, like the artists and the designers and animators and what, designed a character, art, and kit to fit that idea of like this obnoxious guy who's obsessed with himself.
Would in that case fit the personality, but sometimes it's the reverse order.
I think it just happens across the board. Somebody has a vision, if they have a really strong vision, like kit or champion or art or something like that informs a lot of the rest of the things that follow.
Right, and so I'm sure you'd like to hear this about Vi, so I'll use her as an example. Vi was a character who came from a piece of concept art, and she was this punky girl with these giant fists and like the punk aesthetic. And I came in one of my first days at Riot, and I was asked like, which champion do you think is really cool? And I was like, oh wow, her up on the board. I want to make her, please. And luckily she had been approved to, and I worked with the concept artist, but like that all came from that art, that basic. The gameplay of Vi's kit was all about how do we make someone who's all about punching you and getting in your face and being aggressive, and that was all from that personality depicted in the art. And so yeah, they come from all over the place, but we wanted to all them together.
Thank you.
All right, over here.
Hello. In terms of character design, I've heard that some champions have been having a visual overhaul, especially Tristana, who's been the first champion I've played since in the game. What has been your story behind those redesigns, and which champions do you think deserve a redesign? Which do you think might want?
Derek!
As you can see, there's a lot of characters that do need some work, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on this, and we try to sort of stack rank what we think, who we think needs it the most, or who we think we can accomplish in a reasonable amount of time. And
We definitely listen to you guys on it. It's not like who shouts the loudest, but we certainly pay attention to what players are saying.
And I think we were first asking, how do we go about that, and how do we decide what to do? And different characters are going to need different things, but when we're looking at a character, this is a character that a lot of people play. There's a lot of, character names exist, and they're awesome people, and it's like, what is it that they love about Tarek, and how can we preserve that, and how can we make that even better? with all the things we've learned over the years, more modern, more fun, more deep, character. Thanks.
Yes, I have a question involving ranked play. I've climbed from the bottom to the top. It's not exactly the easiest thing. I'll play random games with people who are like, "You are incredible. Can you please carry me out of bronze hell," as it's called? And typically that is because you have a phenomenal player who plays a champion very well, such as a Leona that can consistently go, 2 or 3 deaths with 20 plus assists every game. But they can't seem to get out of that bronze and silver bracket. Do you guys have any thoughts or comments on that?
One thing I would say about that, I think, is there's a lot of overvalue on like your lane play. A lot of the times with your specific mechanics, there's guys who are just like amazing veins who, given the right chance, can do it. The thing is though, is like we always say, this thing is a team game, right? Most designers are in about high diamond, mid diamond, something like that. Never mind. Sorry, most of the live team. Sorry, I said that. Anyway, the thing is though, is that they play across a different range of roles. I played support all the way up, and the thing is it comes with leadership essentially in your team. The thing about solo queue is it's very easy to think just raw game mechanics or what decided, but it's also the decisions that you get your team to do, and sometimes it's committing to the wrong decisions with a team who's making the wrong decision and trying to make something out of that. Because I think everyone knows there's this guy who's like, I know exactly what we should have done in lane and we didn't do it. We just lost. You have to work with that and you have to know how to manipulate that and use that to your advantage. And that's kind of the secret almost of climbing up.
Thank you.
The speakers coming back towards us, and I was going to turn that up a little bit.
Hey guys, this is a question about general balance. So you guys talked about making champions viable to play, thousands of games.
Right.
And in recent history, you guys have tried to make all types of team comps viable, such as split pushing and wave clear, sieging, and that kind of thing. But you also make very targeted bans toward, or not bans, nerfs toward playstyles, such as the recent assassin nerfs. So I guess my question is, do you guys actually believe in a state of absolute balance, or is it more of a case that it's strategically beneficial to have an ever-changing meta that you reinforce during balance?
That's a good question.
I want to answer that, but I'll let somebody jump in on it. Because I think one of the important things is players also shape a lot of the game, and in terms of when you say that there's going to be an objectively balanced game, I just don't think that that's possible as long as there's so many different players doing different things. And there's something where when we go in and we try to do some balance changes and we want to impact the game in some way, I don't think that we're going for we need to get to 50% or something, because I think numbers are just they're a red herring a lot of time. In terms of trying to influence and help out the game, I think the important thing is always working with the community and understanding how they engage with it, and making sure that, yes, different playstyles are viable, but also understanding when it's just people are jumping onto a bandwagon in some ways. And you can definitely see this in a lot of pro play, but sorry.
The other thing that I would mention is I think it's very hard to achieve that state of perfect balance when we actually release new content. Because you can have characters that might work really well with a new character we just released, and all of a sudden a character that was totally fine is now just #1 big bang. We've totally had that experience happen before. We've also had this with releasing new items, even on smaller stuff. I worked on the Masteries update, and all of a sudden basically accidentally bumped into a lot. Sorry. But in a constantly game state that's changing all the time, I think imperfect balance is not really something you should even be trying to achieve. You just basically want to try and get the best ecosystem and the best environment for people to play.
Oh, over this way.
Hi. I was going to point out specifically about Lulu in Season 3, where she ended up being, at the beginning of season, support, then she ended up in middle, then she ended up in top, in that fast, maybe 2 or 3 months. How did your team react to even pro play and regular play? Oh, what do we do? Or were you oh, well, we'll just change her to get her back into support? Or did you want her in all the roles in every lane?
So, the approach we took to that, and we try to take to things similar to that, is it's not about saying, oh, well, Lulu's a support, now she's a mid lane, let's get her out of there. No, like, we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to say, why is she being played mid lane? And is there still good gameplay? Is there still good actions that her opponents can take to be able to beat her in the mid lane? And so we like it if Lulu's support, and we want to support that. And we like it if Lulu's mid lane, but we want to make sure that in both of those positions, she is viable. She is viable in a way that like doesn't suppress the rest of the game or the rest of the character or roster. And that's where it gets difficult, because how do you make it so mid Lulu's not suppressing the rest of mid, while still is viable to support? But we don't take an approach of like, well, she's not in the right lane, so let's put her back there. That's not how we don't want to be
trying to be less heavy-handed about that. We've been historically of like, oh, players are doing something we didn't expect, we have to stomp it down. Because that just, after a while, players give up. They're like, well, I'm not going to experiment because Riot's just going to fix it anyway. We'd rather see the game evolve and encourage players to try crazy things. And just, as long as it's healthy and people are having fun, that sounds awesome. Great question. All right, over to this side.
So speaking of Yordles, Tristana just got her update, like visually, and like her kit kind of balanced out a little more. Do you think all the other Yordles are going to have a similar visual update? Because Nara's Ancestry and the whole big ears thing, and Tristana now has her big ears. Are you going to update other Yordles like Poppy, Vigar, Quirky, Heimerdinger, etc.?
We're definitely going to, at some point, who knows, no promises, we will probably get through a bunch of the other Yordles. And I mean, I don't think that, we're not artists, but I work with this team, fairly closely, and I don't think every Yordle is going to have characteristically big ears, but I think that that's a part of, Nar and Tristana are sort of maybe, that's their sort of look, that's maybe the type of Yordle that they are. But I think that there are a few trends that you see in those where there's a little bit more sort of animalistic qualities. They look a little bit more feral, right? They have some fur and it's a little more visible. It's not like they're blue skin, they actually have blue fur. And so, I mean, yes, I think you can expect to see that trend carry on with Yordles in the future.
The thing to know about Nar, by the way, is he's prehistoric, so he's like got some things that have basically been lost to Yordles over time, like the ability to turn into a giant monster. If Timo could do it. He is a giant monster. He's already a monster. Yeah, thank you.
Hi guys. So my question is, this season we've seen Smite change to give us more of a customization differentiation. How has that affected your champion design? And can we expect to see those changes to some of the other summer spells? Maybe to give us a reason to take like clarity.
That's a couple different questions. In terms of clarity specifically, that's a whole separate can of worms. I won't go into that as much. But I think if you want to go down the route of having different things that impact your summoner spells, I think that's something that I think we learned a lot from our experimentations on the Smite changes. That's something we're definitely going to be pursuing and looking at in the future. No idea how that would look, right? But it's very possible we've experimented with other items. Even in the past, we had like Elysia's Miracle, the item that basically enhanced a couple of different summoner spells. I think I would totally expect us to at least be experimenting internally more along throughout the future.
And I don't know that it's a goal that every summoner spell gets equal use, but it is a little weird to have some that you're virtually dead. You should fix them or cut them at some point.
And also, we're not necessarily expect that we're going to have 4 variants of every single summoner spell. But I do think the idea that you can modify and interact with these is really cool.
On this side.
When it comes to the unique inputs, such as the consumes, or the knockups, or the bubbles, when you're trying to think of a new one, and you're trying to design these champions, how much time goes into trying to figure out new inputs, or unique new inputs?
Yeah.
So, how much time goes into it? So for me, that's one of the things I actually like to start with on a champion that I work on is basically say what's a new way to experience League in this role, or just as this character. And so for Vi, one of the things that I did originally, Volt Breaker has been on the kit since day one. Her Q, by the way, she charges it, dashes forward, and instantly kills the carry. That's Volt Breaker. But that's been on the kit from day one, and I always thought about it. One of the things I always thought about where it's like, this is a new way to play a melee character because like most people don't like charge up something that rockets them into the enemy team in such a way, so that would be really exciting. And for Jinx, it was always thinking about the weapon swap mechanic of, oh man, I'm constantly making decisions in the game of, is it better to be a minigun right now or better to be a rocket launcher? And making those two weapons play off each other in such a way that that was a really compelling and exciting choice. And so Jinx players, it's not the craziest thing, it's not the most skill-intensive thing, but it is like something that Jinx players get to think about and be excited about. It's like, well, I think about this weapon swapping, and that's fun to play around.
And there are kind of mechanics like that just naturally almost like give you a free unique input. So like when I was looking at Jace, for example, he has a hammer gun. Like a gun hammer, right? Like I don't have to try to make that a unique input. That's just already unique and really crazy and fun.
I want to do a shout out for our gameplay engineers because we'll go to them and say, hey, we've got this crazy idea. And their first reaction is like, you want to do what? Like, but then they do it. And they try really hard to give us all the crazy stuff we can come up with.
Because you have to, a lot of times, engineer a lot of these things. Like when you want to create a new mechanic, like it has to interact with a game that makes sense and is clear and all that stuff. And you have to get an engineer to like help facilitate that. And like that takes a lot of time actually.
Great question.
Yeah.
This side.
Okay, so there's one champion some love, many hate, and his late game is not exactly the best. So I was really wondering, when is Timo getting a buff?
Timo's late game is crazy town. Just letting you know. It may not feel that way, man. AB Timo. AB Timo. Oh, yeah, Andrew's a monster.
I almost answered Super TF.
Riot!
Always TF. Always TF.
I think there's some gameplay where he needs. We don't want to strip his identity away, but he can be frustrating to play against. So I want to make sure we can temper that a little bit. Right, over here.
My question regards a statement made by Riot a while back. Early season 2, there was a statement made saying creating a champion similar to Invoker in Dota would place a burden of knowledge on the player. Now, we have champions with vastly different skill sets. We have champions who have 2 different skill sets. We have champions who have items that augment their skill sets. We have over hundreds of champions, well, 800 of champions. Can we look forward to having a more complex champion, such as Invoker? Not carbon copy.
I think that the champions that, and we've debated this a lot internally, is champions over time have gotten more complex, right? There's a lot more thinking involved when you're playing, Azir or Yasuo or something than some of the original 40 characters. And Invoker is, if we abstracted Invoker, it's more like a character with, instead of 4 abilities, like 10 or 12 or something. And so 14, right, exactly. And so, we would probably want to evaluate each design for its merits. And so we said, do we want to make a character with 14 abilities? Where there's some benefits to that, but there's also some pretty heavy costs in terms of how do we communicate with your how does your opponent track all their cooldowns and stuff like that. And so, I don't know, I think that you can expect pretty complex champions that require a lot of practice and games to master, but will we make Invoker specifically? No, probably not.
We have about 5 minutes left. We're going to keep answering questions as long as we can. Again, I'll plug, once we run out of time, you can head over to the main queue area past registration. Over here.
Okay, so my question is, as game designers, how do you respond when something that you originally designed to play test it, and then when it gets released, for example, Black Cleaver, and it comes out, and the community responds to it and says, this item is too broken, or this item isn't working as intended. How do you respond to situations like that?
So, as someone who got tons of crap from my coworkers about Black Cleaver, it wasn't actually, this is much a lot of me, so. It varies so drastically on a case-by-case basis. There are a lot of cases where on the Cleaver instance, it was like, oh yeah, our bad, that was a mistake. This was just really mismanaged over 2. And so we just immediately try to address it as quickly as we can. There are other times when you might want to see something shakes out and see, test our own assumptions, see how the game evolves in a week, 2 weeks, or eventually even longer. It varies so drastically.
We're here. Hey, my question is in regards to the character's presence outside of the game. I really like the lore backstory, specifically using Scion, Elon, Jessica's lore. Is when developing a character, is that part of that same process when they're being developed, or is it just like, we want to have something like this just per year, like a number, or is that just part of the internal development?
So the narrative backstory is typically part of the development process, happening concurrently, because it also kind of informs things like the art. Like you need to know things about the character's personality, where they come from, what motivates them, stuff like that. How would they animate? How would they move? How would they talk? What are their lines?
Yeah, well, let me clarify. I realize I didn't specify. I meant more like on the actual website, like the reveal, and like Jinx's video, things like that.
That actually does get built out.
Yeah, we built that out. It's a consideration that we're taking into account more and more, especially like after things like the Jinx video, where we saw like, wow, that's actually a really exciting way. Because honestly, like one of the things about making a champion is I can make good gameplay, and that's like going to be great. Making Legends really fun. But a lot of players really just like their champions for who they are, right? Like they like Jinx because she's Jinx. And so building out that backstory and like letting players experience the personality of the character in multiple situations and multiple mediums, we think is valuable and exciting.
All right, we'll try to do 2 more questions. Go.
As a game designer, what do you think about champions with very low amounts of active skills, such as Yi, who essentially has one combat skill, the rest of them are pretty much passives where you just click on them, they just give you stats. Like, are they healthy for the game, or should they be reworked to something else? Because another bad example would be Skeleton King from Dota, which had one skill.
So I guess what I would say based off that is like, I think there's a lot more that goes into Yi beyond just clicking on dudes. Like you have to understand when to hit W, you have to understand the Q like lets you dodge, and like that may seem like silly at the front, but I guess it's like League of Legends is a lot more than just mechanical skill, and so not every character has a skill shot to be necessarily interesting. I think Udyr was referenced earlier, but like basically it's like I will agree that like Yi is not as mechanically skill intensive as a lot of other characters, but he actually does have to make some important decisions, assuming he's balanced and not just killing everybody instantly. About how he enters a fight, where he enters a fight, when he uses meditate. Is he using Q to gap close or to dodge spells, and stuff like that.
It all boils down to, is the character able to make interesting decisions? And if yes, we're happy with them. If no, we're not, and that's irrelevant of their targeting types and how many skills are passed to them.
Right, over here.
My question goes for like production-wise. Like you go through all these months on a certain champion, and as soon as it's released, like it's soon like, oh, nerf all the time, like nerf everything. Like, how do y'all feel about that? Like, all your hard work and all like the double checks you did, and immediately like to get crushed down.
Are you saying that new champions get nerfed all the time?
Oh, like, let me see.
Fins out.
Like,
I mean, I'll push that out. It's like
so we buffed Gnar after he came out.
Buffed Gnar, yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about like maybe like even Yasuo, like those Q, like super cool, like low cooldown. You know, like it's like, oh, we don't like that. Like, you thought this was like a perfect idea.
I think that bonds is a kind of imperfect science, and so, imperfect science, and so we expect that when we release things, we're going to have to buff or nerf them once we figure out, the data, we get more information on them. And, sometimes it's true that we see mechanics that we thought were really great and they don't work out. And so this is why we, keep doing updates and keep doing patches, and we'll continue to fix things as they go.
So that's all the time we're going to have. Thank you so much. Thank you for playing the